Starting off this hour, a look into the economic collapse in America. For so many people, what has happened feels like a deep, dark hole. The challenge of climbing out, insurmountable. The question of how to fix the broken economy, issue number one for all of those facing re-election a year from now. But in order to understand what happens next, it's also important to understand how we got here in the first place. Well, according to the directors of a new documentary, it was a deliberate dismantling of middle-class prosperity through rampant deregulation, the outsourcing of jobs, and tax policies favoring businesses and the wealthy, committed by American corporations and their elected allies and lobbyists. The film is called Heist: Who Stole the American Dream? Here's a little look at it.
If you're poor, you're on your own. If you're poor, sink or swim.
This country is working for the richest people, the elites, and for nobody else.
This is class warfare. The top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%.
Well, Donald Goldmacher is the producer and one of the directors of this film. He is in our studios in Los Angeles and joins me now. Hey there, Donald. I know you and Francis Causey have been working on this for more than 5 years. And the situation that we're in today is, in the minds of many, the result of simply some poor choices made, both by large corporations and lawmakers. But you seem to be arguing in this film, based on those you've interviewed, that this was no accident, that actually this was planned. Talk to me about why you think the bad economy is a heist, as you call it, and not the result simply of some unfortunate circumstances.
Well, to begin with, in our film, we highlight a memo that was initially secretly written for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce by a gentleman whose name was Lewis Powell, who 2 months later was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court by Richard Nixon. In that memo, he outlined a strategy for how big business could lobby and take over the government and politics of the United States, and therefore allow corporations to assume real power, as they had before the 1929 crash on Wall Street.
And I know these are concerns. These are concerns that seem to be echoed in the voices of protesters that we've spoken to, people associated with the Occupy Wall Street movements taking place around the country. I'm wondering if you think that these movements have the power to change, what you assert has been purposely orchestrated. And I know also you are making a shorter version of this film for the movement, so I want you to talk about that as well.
Right. We highlight in the film both what's happening on Wall Street with the occupation there and around the country, but we also highlight other social movements that have already begun to work before Occupy made its appearance. So, for example, we certainly document what happened in Madison, Wisconsin earlier this year by organized labor, the last segment of organized labor with any power, that is public sector unions. And we also indicate that social movements are the only way that things are going to change in this country. As we posit it, there is organized money and there are organized people.
Those are the only two kinds of power. I did see that on your website. And I want to ask you about sort of how this all started. From what I understand, this started as an investigative piece on undocumented workers crossing the Arizona border. And it seems to me that this is not what the final product seems to focus on. I guess, talk to me about how the initial idea and the final product are, in fact, related.
Well, the bottom line of how they're related is very simple. It's called class warfare. Another term to use that has been bandied about over the recent years is the race to the bottom. That is, how to lower the wages of people who are manufacturing goods that are destined for the U.S. consumer. So if you can offshore those goods and have them made in China for 50 cents an hour by Chinese workers instead of for 20 bucks an hour here in the United States, the corporations make an enormous profit by that. Similarly, if you import undocumented workers to work in certain industries like meatpacking and construction, and hotels, you lower the costs and you destroy unions. And that's exactly what's occurred over the last 25 years. So you're insourcing cheap labor, simultaneously outsourcing good jobs in other industries. So every which way, corporations have figured out how to lower their labor costs at the expense of working people, unions, and increasingly the rest of the middle class of the United States.
I'm wondering, though, I mean, I think in 2006, when you started on this project, there was probably an influx of undocumented workers crossing our borders. I'm wondering if you found, as the project went on, from a lot of what I have been reading, is that over the last couple years, that the number has really started to go down of undocumented people crossing the borders.
Well, that's for several reasons. Obviously, it's a result of the economic depression that we're in here in the United States. So why would people illegally or undocumented come into the United States when there are no jobs? And there's an increasing level of chronic unemployment that neither party wishes to aggressively address in the U.S. Congress. So therefore, there's no how shall I say, push for undocumented workers to come into the United States because there really are no jobs.
I want to talk about
in construction.
This movie, this documentary, there was another one that came out recently called Too Big to Fail. This looked at some similar issues that you guys seem to be looking at, and this was one that certainly hit home for a lot of people. In fact, it won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. I'm wondering how your film differs and what kind of new information might be coming out of this.
Okay. To begin with, I think you're talking about Inside Job, which was a look at how the collapse of Wall Street actually occurred in 2008.
Yes, you're right. Too Big to Fail was the HBO documentary, but Inside Job, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, right. Too Big to Fail is the HBO film that's currently on the air. What we're looking at is 40 years. What Inside Job looked at was a piece of the elephant. We're trying to connect the dots between all parts of the elephant. And that means deregulation of industry, beginning with airlines back in 1977, increasingly deregulation of the financial industry, leading to the savings and loan collapse in 1987, increasing deregulation of telecommunications, allowing for mergers and consolidation so that we now only have a handful of media giants. All of these combined together with the intensive lobbying by big business to decrease their tax load, not only for themselves, but increasingly decreasing the tax burden for the very wealthiest, the top 10th of 1% of the United States population has gotten so fat and so rich over the last 30 years due to tax cuts that were lobbied for. That was not looked at by any other film, and we felt we needed to show all of these elements in order for the American people to truly understand what this heist is really all about.
All right, and certainly, as you say, there are a lot of dots to be connected. We want to mention to our viewers the date for that to be released to the general public has not been set, but hopefully we will be able to see this soon. Looks very interesting. Donald Goldmacher, the producer, director of Heist, Who Stole the American Dream.